Today, we are joined by a truly remarkable guest whose life story is nothing short of inspiring. Sally Orange is a multi award winning military veteran and physiotherapist, a multiple world record holding endurance athlete, and an adventurer with 22 years of exemplary service. Beyond her decorated military career, she is an Invictus Games medalist, a passionate charity ambassador, and the United Kingdom's first and only female national ambassador for the Army Cadets, a role she embraces with pride as part of her mission to empower others to achieve their dreams. Despite facing adversity from frontline services in Afghanistan to struggles with mental ill health and humble beginnings, Sally radiates resilience, her infectious smile, can do spirit, and ability to connect across generations and cultures make her a beacon of hope and strength. Her achievements are staggering: more than 80 marathons, 11 world records, and the distinction of being the only person to run a marathon on every continent in fancy dress. She has swamped the English Channel, cycled the length of New Zealand and across the USA, conquered 8 full Iron distance triathlons, and braved the legendary marathon Des Sables, often called the toughest foot race on earth. But what makes Sally truly extraordinary is not just her athletic feats, it's her ability to weave vulnerability with compassion, humility, and joy. She has become a force multiplier in the veterans community and far beyond, breaking down barriers and opening conversation that matter. So join us as we dive into the story of Sally, a woman whose courage, creativity, and relentless drive to help others remind us all of the power of resilience and the beauty of living with purpose. Sally, welcome to Ink and Insights with Sumit Sarma Samir.
Thank you very much. Really looking forward to it.
Sally, what inspired you to join the military, and how did those 22 years of service have shaped you?
I must admit, it's not something that runs in the family. Nobody in my family had sort of been in the military. I didn't actually know anything about the military growing up. It was only when I was at university for my second degree that I found out about something called the Officers Training Corps. And thought, wow, that sounds good fun. So I joined that. I say I joined it. I was actually on the reserve list for the selection weekend. And it was only because somebody didn't turn up that I was then able
Oh,
to
wow.
have an opportunity to go on the selection weekend, and then was selected. And yeah, that's where it all started, really, back in 1998. So
Right.
young physiotherapy student at the time, that then went on to sort of joining the reserves and then becoming full time with the Reserve Army, and deploying to Afghanistan and doing lots of different adventurous training all over the world.
Right, right. As a physiotherapist in the armed forces, how did you balance caring for others while, serving on the front lines in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so in the military, you are sort of a soldier first and foremost. So you do learn all the basic training of how to use a weapon. But primarily as a physiotherapist, you're there in a caring role. So I was never actually on the front line. I served in somewhere called Camp Bastion, where the field hospital was, and that's where injured casualties would be brought back from the forward operating bases if they were injured, and treated there, and we would hopefully be able to get them back out to the front line, or if they were very seriously injured or couldn't go back to their role, then we'd have to send them back to the UK and casevac them back there. So I couldn't ever claim to have been on the front line. And although I did carry a weapon when I went out to sort of Lashkar or Kandahar, or Kabul, where I would do other clinics, it really would be getting to a bad situation if I was needing to use my weapon in the role that I was taking part in while I was over there.
Right, right. Sally, how did your humble beginnings, influence the drive and determination that you carry today?
When I look back, my dad he's one of 11 children. Unfortunately, he lost his mother when he was 7 years old. So he was brought up by his father in a place called Grimethorpe in Yorkshire, which is a
Right.
mining community. So his dad was a miner, worked down the pit. Um, and they really, back in them days, they really didn't have very much at all. My dad was the first in his family to go to college and then go on to university, which was just unheard of. I say the first, he was the only, and I think all the values and the hard work and the discipline that was needed, I guess, to survive being one of 11 in harsh times was then sort of forwarded onto us. Not at all. I'm one of four, so again, it wasn't. It was mum and dad didn't have a lot of money, but they had a really strong work ethic, and drive to sort of become something, almost to, I don't know if it was to sort of my dad, whether it was to prove that he could do things, especially one of 11, you're sort of basically part of a football
Correct.
team, but some of his brothers and sisters were so much older than him that they'd left home, but he was also then sort of helping with the younger ones as well. So I think, yeah, it's what they've then instilled, what I've seen him do and then continue to do myself as well.
Right, right. Is it the same inspiration behind, all the achievements that you have made so far? I mean, you have completed over 80 marathons and hold 11 world records. I mean, is it the same inspiration that keeps pushing you for the new boundaries?
It's very different. My success isn't necessarily monetary. I'm not rich financially, but I do feel very rich in life's experience and what I've been able to see and the people that I've been able to meet. So people's goals are very different, and my sort of driver has almost come from my own adversity, that I very much from a young age struggled with not feeling good enough and being very anxious, and then getting to a point where I was very depressed. This negative voice in my head really sort of ground me down, and it got to a point where I really didn't feel that the world was anywhere that I should be. I didn't feel that I had a place in it, and it got so bad that I didn't sort of leave the house for 2 months, and I didn't speak on the phone for 2 years, and I really wanted to end my life. But it was slowly and surely, sort of with help and support, that I was picked up and supported. And my drive really is to make sure that nobody else ever has to feel the way that I felt when I was so severely depressed, and anxious. And that's the main driver behind it. And whilst the fancy dress and the fruit, sounds quite fun, and it is really fun. It's really colourful when I put on a different fruit costume. But the
Right,
main driver behind it is that people smile, and it's always nice to
right,
make people smile. But then they'll quite often ask, why? Why am I dressed as an apple, orange, or banana? And I tell them that I want to change the conversation and break the stigma associated with poor mental health. And that in itself quite often then opens up the conversation, and people will perhaps say that maybe they or someone that they know has had a problem. And yeah, it just sort of it really subtly opens up that conversation.
right. In fact, I was going to ask you that question. Running a marathon on every continent in fancy dress is wonderfully unique. What inspired that idea? In fact, is it the same thing that you just outlined? Is it because you wanted to,
I mean,
uh, you
it's
know,
sort of it came from my surname. Initially, I'd done my first marathon. I'd done it dressed as a superhero. And I remember
right.
crossing the finish line and feeling like a superhero, probably for the first time in my life, because this is something since the age of 8. I'd thought, wow, I'd love to run a marathon. It had
Mhm.
just taken me until I was 34 until I actually plucked up the courage to
Right.
actually, give it a go. So when I did it as a superhero, I raised quite a lot of money. And I quickly thought, oh, I'm going to do that again, but needed to do something different. And that's why I thought, oh, my surname's Orange. I'll run as an orange. And then it was actually in Afghanistan. They were doing another marathon, and I thought, oh, I could be a banana. So I got a banana
Mm.
costume sent out to me. And then later that year, I was on exercise in America. And I'd got a watermelon costume. So I thought, oh, I could run as a watermelon. And I realized
Right.
then that I'd ran a marathon in 3 different continents, and just thought, wow, might as well, I saw the reaction that it was having from people, and thought, I can, really sort of do something, as you say, slightly different and slightly unique. And it also takes away the pressure of, having a certain time. Often people will say with a marathon, what time are you aiming for? And I
Mm.
just say the time of my life, because I'm in control of if I have a good time. Whereas if I'm going for a certain time, maybe 4 hours, and I don't achieve that, then I've already got this narrative in my head that will tell me I'm a failure. So I don't need
Right.
anything to reinforce that. And that could be because of the weather. It could be because somebody, trips me up, or I thought, something adverse. Whereas if I tell myself, you've got to smile all the way around this marathon,
Right.
it might be a grimace at times, but it's something that I can be in control of. And then if somebody's struggling, I can stop and help them, and it doesn't have an impact on that goal. In fact, it almost sort of enhances it, because it means that I've helped somebody else along the way. So yeah, there's lots of sort of different bits to it.
Right.
And also,
Right. Right.
with a marathon, everybody gets the same medal, whether you come
Mm.
first or you come last. You get the same medal, and it's that sort of personal sense of pride and achievement that I get from it.
And of all your endurance challenges, either it's swimming the English Channel or cycling across New Zealand and the USA, Ironman triathlons or marathons in des Sables, which one do you think tested you the most, and why?
It's a great question, because they've all tested me in different ways. Some that I've done as part of a team, which is very different to doing something individually. I think probably one of the biggest challenges was when I did something called the World Marathon Challenge, which was 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 consecutive days. So that meant
Wow.
that all of your eating, your sleeping, your recovery was essentially on a plane getting to the next marathon, the next continent. But I did that in a bid to take the mental health message around the world. It is a worldwide problem that we struggle with that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to really sort of take that message around the world. And then equally difficult, it's probably the most difficult marathon, was actually the Everest Marathon. And that was
Hmm.
this year, 2025.
Right.
It was actually my second time of taking part in it, but I had actually just been diagnosed with breast cancer a few weeks before, and I really sort of pleaded with my consultant whether or not I could delay my surgery for a couple of weeks, because I really wanted to take that mental health message to the top of the world. Having taken
Mhm.
it around the world, I really wanted to shout about it from the top of the world. And I'd done it the year before, dressed as a slice of lemon, because
Right.
I was icing a slice, and managed to open up conversation with different Nepali people along the way. And then going back the next year, I was going to be a slice of lime, so still on that ice and a slice theme. But this was to make a documentary
Right.
about your beautiful country, about the difficulties of mental health within Nepal, and really sort of tell my story along
Mm.
with some other people who have been through some really difficult times, both from the UK and Nepali originated. Um, and yeah, and
Right.
then the cancer story sort of diagnosis came into it. So I thought, why not make the best of this situation? And I chose to trek up to Everest Base Camp dressed as a giant boob. So it was
Right.
again, on this visual sort of theme. And I do remember, one moment where, seeing a local lady, and I was there dressed in this giant boob, and she's sort of in Nepali, sort of trying to look under it, look round it, look over it. What is this? And I then sort of
Right.
said to her, do you want to put it on? And it was the most beautiful moment that two people from two different countries who don't speak the same language had, not only ourselves laughing, but everybody
Right.
around us sort of laughing. And then she put the costume on. And it was probably my favourite moment from the trip. But that marathon, that single marathon, the Everest Marathon this time, doing it with cancer, was incredibly difficult. And it was my 88th marathon, and it's
Right.
probably the hardest marathon, because there was so much emotion attached to it. There was the fact that I probably, I shouldn't really have been able to go there. I should have been having surgery at that time. And I got really quite ill while I was there. And I think for the first and probably only time, I felt like I'd got cancer. Although I must admit, I felt like I'd got lung cancer rather than
Right.
I'd got breast cancer. But yeah, I got to the finish and I just sobbed my heart out, because
Right.
it was so difficult.
तिमीसँग अब धेरै टाइम छैन है बिहे गर्नु छ भने गरिहाल नत्र घरबाट मलाई अन्त्य बिहे गर्दिनु
भर्खर 3 वर्ष भयो एमबीबीएस जोइन गरेको 5 वर्षको कोर्स हो के भो अचम्म छ एक्सक्युज मी सर मेरो 5 वर्षको कोर्स 3 वर्षमा सकाउन मिल्दैन
गेट आउट
हेलो
के सोच्यौ त
के सोच्ने मैले प्रिन्सिपलसँग पनि कुरा गरिसके 3 वर्षमा पनि के हुन्छ 3 वर्षमा
के भयो भाइ ल बस साउजी एक कप चिया कसले भन्यो 3 वर्षमा केही हुँदैन भनेर यो हेर एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजनामा 3 वर्षमा पैसा फिर्ता हुन्छ
ए हो र
जीवन बीमाको साथमा धनवृष्टि 3 वर्षमा एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजना एलआईसी नेपाल
I could imagine actually, in fact, having known that you were already diagnosed with the cancer at that point of time when you were in Nepal for the marathon, how did you prepare mentally and physically for such an extreme challenge?
Well, I'd actually, unbeknown to me, prepared in a way a couple of months earlier that I'd actually climbed Mount Aconcagua with some good Nepali friends, actually. A friend of mine,
Right.
Harry Buddhamaga, who was the first double above knee amputee to summit Mount Everest. And so I'd already been to altitude with cancer. I just hadn't been diagnosed with the cancer. I knew before I went, I felt the lump, but I didn't want to tell anyone because I didn't want them to say, oh, you can't go and climb this mountain. So in my head, I knew that cancer wasn't going to stop me at altitude. I'd already done something really quite physically, arduous. Right. And I think mentally that just, I knew that I'd done a marathon. I knew that I'd done that marathon before at altitude. I just hadn't done it with cancer, but, put the two together. So it didn't faze me so much. I think it was more my consultant that when I said, but can I still do the Everest Marathon? That she said, that's not a question I've ever been asked before when I've told a patient
Right.
that they've got breast cancer. But for me, it was a fantastic opportunity to be able to show that a cancer diagnosis doesn't have to stop everything. I wanted to prove that cancer was going to work on my terms, not on its terms. And I know that quite often once you enter into this journey, it's a case of saying, right, the surgeon says you need this and you need chemo and you need, radiotherapy. And yes, you do need them. But I chose, for it to fit around me within, the realms of what's possible. For example, now I've just finished my chemotherapy, and I've decided I just want a little break before I start the radiotherapy. So I've given myself 4 weeks, and I'm using that time to get fit, to do a lot of swimming, do a lot of running, a lot of walking. So in my way, it's preparing myself mentally and physically. And my background as a physiotherapist shows that actually, prehabilitation before undergoing a treatment can be really beneficial. So I'm just kind of walking the walk, or running the run, or talking the talk, really.
Right, right. What role, Sally, does positivity and your can-do attitude play in overcoming setbacks?
I think I liken this almost to sport, and maybe to a marathon or a triathlon. And this whole journey I've almost seen as a long sort of Ironman triathlon. And I say that because you have to have a certain positive mindset to get through an Ironman. 2.4 miles swimming, 112 miles on a bike, and then a full marathon of 26.2 marathons. So I know that I've done that 8 times before. So once I was diagnosed, I kind of thought, well, actually, I've had a bit of pre-training with this, because unfortunately, a few months before, my dad was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And so I'd been to all of his chemotherapy sessions with him. So that sort of was almost my training. And then the surgery I saw as my swim. So that was sort of the shortest amount of time that was needed for that. Once that was over, it was then chemotherapy, which effectively was my bike. Which is, a long time on the bike. And again, the chemotherapy has probably taken the longest chunk of time. And I'm soon about to embark on the marathon phase of it. And that will be the radiotherapy. And then the drugs that I need to take for 3, 7, 9 years after that will sort of just be my ongoing training, and I'll take on other events. So I've almost likened it to something that I know that I have achieved previously. Yes, I know that it was challenging, but I've been able to do it. And I just think that a positive mindset, it's wasted energy if you spend the time worrying. And I can say that as somebody who is a natural born worrier, who has, struggled with anxiety, most of my life, but I've also had a lot of therapy about the anxiety and how to sort of combat that. And I think the difficulties that I've had with my mental health in the past, and all the therapy that I've had to help with that, has really made this cancer journey not as difficult as perhaps some people have experienced. I think having been through that adversity previously, and finding myself when I no longer wanted to live, it's very interesting that with cancer, it's a physical illness, whereas mental illness is not, but they're both invisible. The only thing at the moment that really lets anyone know that I'm on that cancer journey is the fact that I no longer have any hair. If I put a wig on, people don't know that, but the support that I've had on the cancer journey has been so much better than it was on the mental health journey. And whether that's because of the stigma, I think it essentially is. I think, if you were to look back at cancer, 40, 50 years ago, there was also the stigma to cancer, and people wouldn't necessarily tell people. And I think, they're both individual cancer. There is no one cancer that is the same for any two people, the way that they react. So they're very similar parallels. And whether I've taken, a lot of that learning of just having to accept, certain things are happening to me, and not really fight it too much. It's a case of having to go with the flow. I'm sort of, the professionals are the ones that are there helping me on the journey, and it's putting my trust in them. But I've seen so many other people come out the other side, and live a life, and for some people, actually a fuller life after they've been diagnosed.
Right. Sally, what advice would you give to someone struggling to find hope in a difficult circumstances?
Not one for often saying to look back, but I think there are times when it is beneficial to look back and to see how far you've come and how you've overcome other challenges. We've all had challenges in our life, and it might be a case that people can say, but I've never ever had anything this big. They might have had lots of different small challenges that, over time they've been able to overcome. And I think it is a case of going, well, put all of them together, and that's probably a lot bigger than what you've going to go through, and lean on support, from other people. You can see the best in people in a way that you never expect. And I'm sort of on social media at the moment looking at the silver linings of cancer. And I think if you look hard enough, there are so many silver linings. And in fact, yesterday I was speaking about how I feel incredibly fortunate to be struggling with cancer in the UK, whereas, in your country, there's villages and places that are so remote that if somebody is diagnosed, if they're lucky enough in the first place to be diagnosed, to get to a doctor to be diagnosed, then their chances of survival are really quite slim. So I think it's a case of being grateful for what we do have as well, because so many other people in the world don't have that,
Exactly.
and that can carry you a long way.
Right, absolutely. Your colorful personality shines through in your adventures, Sally. How important is humor and playfulness in your journey?
Absolutely, 100%. Laughter is the best medicine. I would say that movement is medicine, because that helps us sort of physically, but I think laughter helps us mentally. And just, maybe it's the military, that sort of that dark humor, that gets you through and sort of gets you through to the next day. And we've all got 100% track record of getting through to the next day. So yeah, humor plays a part. And as the color as well. Color does bring us joy. In a dark time, it's looking for the light and the color. And if you can do that through the rainbow, and with a surname like Orange, it's colourful and fruity all the way through. Orange is actually the colour of adventure as well. So it sort of really sits. It is actually my name. A lot of people think that I've changed my name because of what I do, but yeah, it is actually my name.
Wow. So it's not that you have changed it, just your name.
Yeah. There are lots of, at home, I've got lots of little oranges, mandarins, tangerines, cousins, and we all live in a fruit bowl. So, yeah. And when you've grown up with a name, like Orange, you have to have a sense of humor, because every time you meet somebody, people think that they're the first person to ever say, a certain joke. So yeah, it toughens your skin almost. And in actual fact, when I found my lump, it was because it looked like orange peel. It was sort of quite high up here, and it was quite dimply. And they do say, with breast cancer, to look out for sort of an orange peel type texture on your skin. So yeah, I really became looked like an orange as well, which is what alerted me to the breast cancer and the tumor in the first place.
Right. Sally, what's one story from your endurance challenges that perfectly captures who you are?
One story, it's a slightly longer story, but it's when I did a triathlon called Escape from Alcatraz. And Alcatraz, as we know, is a prison. And for me, mental illness, you feel like a prisoner in your own mind. And so I jumped off the boat to swim from Alcatraz, and I suddenly, the water was really cold and the current was really strong. And I remember swimming and thinking, I'm not getting anywhere here. And I just told myself, just go with the flow, literally go with the flow. And I saw myself float down the water, and I got myself to the side, and I kind of thought, right, I'm not exactly where I want to be. I wasn't at the transition, but I'm safe. And that reminded me of my mental illness when I was under the care of the crisis team, that I wasn't where I wanted to be, but I was safe. So I got myself to the transition. set
Right.
off on the bike, which was through the hills of San Francisco, which reminded me of the ups and downs of mental illness. And then it got to the run. And I remember it ran past the Golden Gate Bridge. And I remember stopping and looking at it and thinking, wow, that bridge to me symbolizes the friends, the families, the professionals, the supporters that can help you bridge the gap to escape from Alcatraz. So that sort of sums up to me what I had been through and what it all meant through an endurance event.
Right, right. Looking back, what achievement are you most proud of? Not for the record, but for the impact it had on others.
I think I would have to say being honoured as an MBE, so a member of the British Empire, for my services to charity and to mental health was a great honour, alongside being invited to accept an honorary doctorate for services to physiotherapy and mental health, and that was from the university that for 6 years in a row had rejected me when I tried to study physiotherapy at
Wow.
university. And 30
Yes.
years later, for the same university to turn around and say, we'd like to offer you an honorary doctorate, I think that can really have an impact on young people on saying, if you failed, but if you really want to do something, if you have that drive, that determination, you can get there. You just sometimes take the scenic route rather than the direct route. And that was definitely the scenic route in getting there. But the impact that I think that can show other people, that, that drive and determination and the right attitude can really help.
If you have drive and determination, you will achieve what you want to achieve. Sally, on that note, I would really like to thank you so much once again for your time. It was really wonderful talking with you. And I'll take this program forward and then I'll tell people about your story as well. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you as well. It's been really, really nice to chat to you.